Hello, wonderful. This is Sarah, and I'm here with Vanessa Reiser. And you may have seen in the internet this bride who had the veil, but then she didn't have a wedding dress on. She had on yoga pants and dressed out and decked out all in white, and she was running for narcissistic abuse awareness. And she is an absolute powerhouse. That it was so funny because all these people kept sending me your info and like, oh, you should see this. I was like, oh, I know her. Wait, I know her. And so, Vanessa, it is an honor to have you here. Your little runaway from abuse bride, right?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that.
Well, tell people what in the world you did in case they don't know.
So I ran across the state of New York in a wedding dress to raise awareness for narcissistic domestic abuse. It was from Oswego to Manhattan, a total of 285 miles, completed in 12 days. It averaged about 24 miles a day. And it was one of the most transformative things that I've ever experienced in my life. So I did it to raise awareness. I thought it would be something people would pay attention to. I was quite right. And also I did it for my own healing, having been victimized. But I do it for the silent victims, the millions of silent victims that can't do that.
Oh my gosh, I love it so much. And if I may use you as an example, I'll use myself as well. But if you use the word victimized, and that's really important because sometimes we get this message that we had low self-esteem or something was broken in us, rather than the fact that, like, whoa, somebody tricked us who we thought we could trust.
Yeah, I think it's really been an interesting experience for me specifically because I don't think that I necessarily fit the profile of what somebody who is a victim might look like, because I am a two-time Ironman. I am a psychotherapist. I got my master's from USC. I've owned my home for 20 years. I have a son who just graduated college. And people say, how could this have happened to you? You know, you don't sort of fit the like shivering in the corner. I've always been a feminist. I'm a very empowered person, rather outspoken. And yet here I was suicidal on the floor of my mother's house, totally and utterly isolated from friends that I lost. I gave up my job. I gave up my home. I was renting it, but I gave up my sense of self. Thankfully, I was able to re-find her. However, it's important to highlight that, you know, it can happen to anyone.
And I want to point out something you said too, because you said, you know, that you're a feminist. You've been raised empowered. And as I'm doing interviews and podcasts and stuff, there's this conversation that, oh, well, you know, women are able to stand up for themselves more, so there probably won't be toxic relationships for the next generation. And I'm like, oh my gosh, that is not what's happening. Do you want to speak into that at all?
I think that what we are understanding, I think, in my tribe and in my group, is that there is this connectedness that we are getting as people and women that have been victimized together. So that collective experience and sort of understanding that we can potentially reach out to the former supply and the subsequent supply and potentially land softly. And that has been a really, really tremendous experience for myself and for the other supplies. We have only figured out what happened to us collectively. It was only like then did we connect the dots and process it fully. It's like each of us was a puzzle piece or something. And we went, oh, okay, that makes sense. Oh, okay, that makes sense. Not one of us together was able to do it alone holistically. It's as if we needed each other to collaborate to really understand. There's four of us, and that so far, and that has been, you know, the magic for us. And so I think that as women, we need to stick together and be, you know, hold space for each other. And one of the biggest things I know as a clinician is that the trauma is not just from the abuser, it's from the people who don't believe us. So the compounded trauma. So when I was working in the Bronx, I would hear from people that were in foster care that they were not as upset as at the rapist as they were at the system, or as they were at their foster parent, or as they were. they're looking around and going, where are the people here to protect me? And so what we really need to do as women is believe our sisters, or as men, believe our daughters, or as, friends, believe our friends when they say, my mother is a narcissist. Yeah, but that's your mother. No. We need to start like a dialogue around how somebody behaves in public may be very different from how they behave behind the scenes.
So in my book, I say there are toxic people and you know them. And if we can embrace that belief, all of us collectively, there are toxic people and I know them. And many of them, I would be surprised if I had a camera following them around for their whole life, not just the version of them that they want me to see. That alone changes the whole game, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, poets, priests, and politicians are legendary, like to sort of put on a front and then behind the scenes behave rather deviantly and create all kinds of chaos and pain and confusion for a lot of people. And certainly if you know anything about a narcissist, you know everything you need to know about a cult leader.
Yes.
So it's one and the same. So we really need to get learned and believe people when they say, this person that you adore is not who you think they are. That's the magic.
And I think that's such a good point because I talk about Bill Cosby, and I remember discovering that Bill Cosby had done this to these women, and I was like, what? No, he's so funny. I know him, right? He's been in my home. I know him. And that it took so many women for people to believe that about him. And I think when we put toxic relationships only in the romantic category, rather than like you're talking about like cult leaders, politicians, famous people, whatever, then, or your kid's baseball coach, right? Like we don't want to have it away from us. Like toxic people are near us. Mm-hmm. And once we can switch out that conversation, we really have a safer space to operate from, both for us and then for others. And it's like, well, Bill Cosby tricked people, throughout history. People have been tricked, and I've been tricked. Who in my life has tricked me that I was surprised by, rather than what? You had a toxic boyfriend? You're in this dangerous category of stupid and codependent and broken and messed up and daddy issues. And I think we try to separate ourselves from it too much, to the detriment of victims.
Yeah. And we also live in a society where we covet fame and money. And the narcissist, the psychopath, and the antisocial are generally CEOs and successful people because they don't have empathy. So they'll climb the ladder rather quickly. So we have to kind of understand that the likelihood of the people who we really admire and idolize, the likelihood is higher that they are actually more toxic. That's just the data. So, if you can kind of put your mind around the numbers and recognize like what that means, it's more likely that you would want to surround yourself with more grounded people actually at the end of the day. And I think, as time goes on, hopefully as a society, we begin to like shift our value system to, not covet those things. And that would be wonderful if we could just appreciate our teachers and our firemen the way we do the, baseball player and stuff like that. So we have a long way to go in terms of like recognizing even how we approach even like a Bill Cosby, somebody who we think is so wonderful. I mean, is he a brain surgeon? I mean, a lot of those are actually narcs too, but at least they're doing really, is it somebody that you want to actually be around? Was he funny? Yes. Did he victimize? Yes. But the likelihood of people in those successful places of being toxic is actually higher.
Which I'm thinking of some clients right now who are in the process of dating, and they're like, oh, I want a guy with like, CEO, tons of money, great job, great personality, very charming, who's also really kind and sweet and romantic. And it's like, whoa, okay. Like I know they exist. I don't want to be like unhopeful, but we have to really work to make sure you're not getting into a dangerous situation with a dangerous person.
Yeah. I'm like, I want a guy who chops wood.
Oh, that's awesome. So what was some of your biggest surprises and takeaways from this journey that you've been on?
I really understand, and I kind of understood when I left my abuser. I had to stay at my mother's house for 3 months on the floor, and my mother is a big trigger for me. So that was very, very challenging. But I realized when I got back into my house, which was 3 months later, my tenant finally left, and I began to feel my power again. Because when I started dating the narcissist, he was like, I like to go to breakfast on Saturdays, but I used to ride my bike on Saturdays because that was my favorite thing to do. I do triathlon. So I found myself being swept away in Ibiza and all over the place. And I forfeited my Saturday rides and I really lost myself. But when I got back home and I could feel like the rumblings of my power come back, I noticed rather quickly that the attorneys were gone. There was nobody sucking my energy anymore. There was almost like rainbows and bunny rabbits. I was like, I am feeling like myself again. And I thought, let me lean into that. Let me run. And I felt so empowered. And what I try to do is coach my clients around getting into your power, because the narcissist is allergic to power. It's like kryptonite. If you're empowered, they want nothing to do with you. It's the vulnerable that they seek. It's the people they can manipulate. I will always tell clients to maintain eye contact with people, always look them right in the eye. And so I'm all about, even if you have to fake it till you make it, puff out your feathers. And this was my I'm strong moment, and it really checked a lot of boxes for me.
I love that. And one of my personal favorite things to do when I have a toxic person encounter of all sorts is get back into some sort of flow state, which it sounds like exercise. I mean, exercise is that for me, not running. I'm like a bar and yoga girl, but getting into that state of flow, or maybe it's playing an instrument or writing or painting, but feeling like yourself again.
Yeah. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think you have to really build mastery. So if there's something that you're good at or something that you enjoy, find that. So if you're not sure, research yourself. What better study than to study yourself? And just those two things. What are you good at? What do you enjoy? And then, have fun. Do you want to ride a horse? Do you want to start gardening? Could be anything. Build mastery, get really good at it. And then shift your cognition towards that when you have negative thoughts, because the narcissist loves to input all of this garbage. So you have to kind of reframe your thoughts too around, I'm good at this, developing almost like some narcissistic tendencies within yourself, like kind of really loving on yourself.
That's exactly what I was going to point out, because you said studying yourself. And if you're not familiar with what narcissism is, then it's like, ooh, isn't that narcissistic that you're studying yourself? But, a narcissist on the far end of the spectrum of narcissism is going to, lack of empathy, flip things to make everything your fault, image management, have a disproportionate, unhealthy relationship with the truth, and definitely not self-aware, because they can't take ownership for any of their bad behavior. So that is not the same thing as being self-aware and practicing self-care, which is what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, because we're really talking about a personality disorder. So it's a broken modem. I don't feel in any way that my clients, as super empaths, as people pleasers and approval seekers, that they are vulnerable to sort of all of a sudden not, feel the pain of the world. I think that that's their work, is actually to become more narcissistic. That's the magic for them.
Yes, and I agree. And it is that spectrum. It was Rethinking Narcissism, that book, and he talks about the spectrum of narcissism. And some of us are, need to be a little more selfish, and others of us need to be way less selfish, right? And that meeting in the middle. That's awesome. So what else did you learn from your journey?
I think it's really important to take off of work. I work quite a bit, and so this was like a vacation for me in some ways. And so I think, again, the self-care was tremendous. I liked being alone in my head with my music. I mean, it was just it was like me imagining like every step was like a step towards closing this door. because I left him in March of 2020. So it was only really recently in a lot of ways, because then there was COVID, which feels like 5 years and 5 minutes in a weird way. But yeah, I think it was just it was like, I knew at the end of this run, I was going to turn the page. And so I just was like, it was like the proverbial finish line was like my real kind of like, you know what? I'm not looking at it on social media. I'm moving past this. It's time for me to just do me. And so I felt really, really excited about, that kind of chapter being closed.
Yeah. And it was so beautiful. If you've, she did these videos and they were just so well done. I mean, you just documented it so well. And it was just such a fun thing to watch and a beautiful thing to watch. And what do you wish people knew about, because you use the word awareness a lot. I know this was a process of awareness. So what do you wish society as a whole was more aware of?
That this is a trauma. So in dialectical behavioral therapy, we always talk about baseline. And anytime you go above baseline or below baseline, you don't do well. So even if you're having a great day, you're at the beach, you're having a love affair, you don't really feel good. It feels like you're anxious. And so you don't feel right. And obviously with depression, you don't feel right. So when you're with a narcissist, they take you on a roller coaster ride of ups and downs, and it creates a trauma. And the data now tells us it's like a drug addict. So what happens is you're looking for that fix. You want them to make it good again, but none of this is healthy. And so people need to understand that just because you can't see the physical signs of the abuse, it is like you got a brain and soul slashing. It's just, you can't see it, but the trauma is real. It's there. It's like rape or war in some cases, especially for the children.
Absolutely.
The children of narcissists are now, it's now considered a big T trauma. So they're basically walking on eggshells their entire lives. And so they end up with a great startle reflex, with nightmares, with all kinds of issues from this trauma. And so I think it's important that we understand, and that's why the mental health piece is so important for me as a clinician, to highlight that this is a real trauma.
So important. And to the mothers out there, when you're thinking like, oh, I've got to stay for the children, there are many wonderful, powerful women who have left for the children. Even if you have to split time with them, you can give them 50% of their lives that they're not in fight and flight. And that is huge compared to their only normal being that high anxiety, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, it's going to be important, in the years ahead, as we begin to kind of talk more and more about this issue, that we find places for people that are safe. I'm noticing that with domestic violence centers, they don't really like the clinical piece, so they steer away from it, which has been very frustrating for me, because it's like, if you say to somebody, I have COVID, and they just go, well, you're just sick. You want to know, what is it? I'm finding that people want to know, what have I experienced? Like, what was the name of it? They want to understand it better, right? So they want to understand the behaviors, the love bombing, the no empathy, the feature faking, all of the specific behaviors that somebody with NPD is practicing. They need to understand that. And Dr. Ramani recently, when she did her Red Table Talk, was talking about all domestic violence is narcissistic abuse. And I thought, oh my God, that's the magic. So when I went on Gretchen Carlson, she sort of fused the concepts together, and she said narcissistic domestic abuse. And I thought, that's it. We need to marry. We sort of have to force people to really understand that this is domestic violence. But the conversations, I think, are tremendous towards that goal. We need to also find places that people can go where they can feel heard and believed.
Well, and I also want to say, because I know there's a lot of conversation like, everybody's a narcissist, the word toxic's being overused. I'm like, I think it's kind of being underused because in some ways we are finally able to name what has been happening for generations, because narcissism is not a new quality. This is a, personality disorder. This is, and a personality disorder means who they are.
Yeah. Freud himself famously walked away from treating borderlines and narcissists all of those zillion years ago because they were very hard to treat. There was very little insight. So it's not a new thing. And that's why I kind of sometimes get upset when I hear, we talk a little bit about capitalism and what we covet and the rest, and it doesn't help matters, but this is not a new issue.
No, Sandra L. Brown, she runs the Institute for Relational Harm, and she said, we measure narcissistic change in minutes rather than miles. It's like, yay, they changed. And it's like, whoa, but this is what needed to happen for them to have a healthy relationship. And, it's like, how many years did it take for them to change this much? And, oh, good, they know not to call you a bitch in public anymore. That's the win?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting.
Yeah, and terrifying.
I mean, there are outliers. People do change, but I would imagine they would do that in something that would be considered like an intake, like an inpatient. So there would have to be in what we might call a sex addiction inpatient program. Sex addiction is actually addiction to attention. So the sex addict is the narcissist. I can't find a differentiator. Sex addiction is addiction to attention, not sex. So in something like that, where you're in an inpatient experience, then yeah, maybe if all day, every day you sat there and studied yourself all day inpatient for months and months, then yeah, maybe. And that might be, that might be the outlier, but it's very, very rare because they don't generally see anything wrong with themselves. And they quite like it because they figure, I'm going to win. I'm the winner. Everything is a competition. And so it's kind of just a different way of thinking.
It's a different universe. And so when women say, but I thought he would change because he loved me. And I was like, but you're speaking two different languages. His love language is control and your love language is connection. So he is loving you. This is how he loves. That's the problem, right? To him, it's control. To you, it's connection. And when you start to, one's got red lenses on, one's got green lenses on, or whatever you want to say, you can start to get some clarity, I guess, and changes you need to make for your future rather than, but if I loved him better, he would have changed. If I'd had better boundaries, he would have changed.
Yeah. I remember when I first left, my therapist was like, we need to talk about why you think you could fix people. And I was like, girl, you are not kidding. I need to figure that out. But I really was like, well, we'll get to the bottom of this and we'll fix it. And I was misdiagnosing him, as a lot of people do and a lot of clinicians do, with bipolar, because he seemed to exhibit rather manic tendencies and ADHD. But yeah, I think, for sure, that's something that we need to talk about as well, which is that clinicians don't generally know what they're doing with this, myself included. And so, I'm trying to also start a movement around helping them to better understand, because they actually do come into practice quite a bit, because they're coming in couples counseling, or they're having, their partner go in and they're kind of, monologuing and seducing the therapist. So we have to do a better, job of identifying them, because they come in a lot, actually.
And smoozing the therapist, I've seen it over and over and over. And it's especially scary in child custody situations where a woman, or it can be either, but trying to get help. And then the toxic partner smoozing the custody evaluator. And it's like, oh my God, this is terrifying. It's terrifying.
I'm sure you've heard all of those stories. I've heard, stories of women going to jail because of false accusations. I had a woman tell me that her daughter committed suicide. It really is so hard, especially for people that are vulnerable. I had to flex because I sit on the board for the Domestic Violence Center in my county when I was getting my one of my many orders of protection, but I had to flex. And I was like, I am this, accomplished white girl, and I can't imagine what it would be like for somebody disenfranchised, potentially with, a language barrier, trying to express themselves. I can guarantee you that they were shut out. I had to really, really throw my weight around to get it. And it took quite a bit of time, but, and this was after he had slashed my tires on my car when I was sitting in the car. I mean, he was, kind of really trying to threaten me to be quiet. But we have so much work to do on a macro level. It's, it's kind of disheartening sometimes, even the word narcissism and the word antisocial in the DSM-5 doesn't really work for me. It should be like psychopath 1, 2, and 3, because antisocial, what do you think of? You think somebody's not social. Antisocial is somebody who's going to kill you while you're sleeping.
Yeah. It sounds like an introvert rather than a serial killer.
Yeah. And narcissism sounds like somebody who likes to take selfies. And again, very dangerous person.
Yes. Thank you so much. I love this work. Please tell people where they can find more about you, more about your projects, and more about what you're doing next.
Sure. So you can find most of the information on my practice at tellatherapist.net. So that's TELL, a therapist. The nonprofit that is there for referring people to a narc savvy clinician is tellatherapist.org. And then there's the life coaching leg, which is monarchscoaching.com.
I love it. Thank you. So I ask everyone this question. If you had 1 minute to broadcast to the entire world, so everyone had to hear what you said, what would you say in that 1 minute that you'd want the whole world to know?
Believe your friends, believe your daughters, believe your coworkers, believe your neighbors. If someone tells you that they are even confused and scared of someone for any reason, believe them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree completely. And it's so interesting to me and fascinating that if a stranger on the street slashed your tires, there would be a lot of help for you. But if someone who says they love you slashes your tires, you're the problem.
It's true.
Something feels wrong. Something feels really wrong with this, right?
That's a really good point. I had never thought about, like, if a stranger did that, how would that have been handled?
Much better.
Yeah. Right. You deserve, the implication is you deserved it. You must have done something.
Yes, I'm working on an article right now of like the worst advice that people have gotten. And I asked all these women like their worst relationship advice. And it was just exactly like that. Well, if you hadn't made him mad, he wouldn't have done that.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I should have listened more.
Oh, yeah. Well, thank you so much, Vanessa. You guys check her out. And thank you for helping us on our journey to becoming toxic person proof.
Thank you so much.